joining us from Brian's channel. Thank you very much. And from Danny's channel, thank you as well. And of course, the iChungching Reporterfy Media Group. Thank you very much for that. Well, as you guys saw at the beginning, we played a little bit of a clip here. I find it a little bit comical, but I guess on the other shores of the world, apparently, China wants war. Over to you, Brian Berletic. What do you think of those quotes at the start of the show?
Well, that was incredible. But actually, I want to kind of throw it over to Danny. Danny's in the United
Yes.
States. Is that a real representation of what American people are listening to every single day? Because that's unreal.
Yeah, I mean, for those who are watching programs like Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, you do get some version of what we heard on Hannity's program, some version of, yeah, China is at war with the United States, whether it is softer, like liberal corporate media portrays it, as in this kind of strategic competition, or whether it is talking about how China is basically eating the United States' lunch, or instituting mythical Chinese police stations in New York City. This is a very real phenomenon. And of course, Fox News does amplify the level of insane rhetoric around China, because that's how they make their money. And so this is a very realistic portrayal of what people listen to. Now, how many people are actually listening to the mainstream media in the United States at this point is questionable, because there has been a huge loss of legitimacy and trust in the mainstream media here in the United States, not least because these are the kind of messages we get, and they're so far detached from the ordinary lives of the majority of people. So that's the question, but it is very effective in the sense that what's more important, in my opinion, is while the mainstream media, Fox News, MSNBC, they promote these anti-China messages and say that China is trying to wage war with the United States, it really is the political leadership in the United States that is the biggest problem, because more people do listen to what, for example, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, people like Antony Blinken, they listen to what they say. They get notifications all the time on their phone when the news reports what they say, when mainstream media from Associated Press to the New York Times report what they say. So it is effective in the sense that what you hear in the mainstream media is actually what the U.S. political class also thinks. And I believe more people do pay attention to that, even if it is just in passing.
Well, Danny, you mentioned the police stations. I want to touch base on that because there's a lot of confusion on this. And I've had some people, say, hey, can you explain this situation before we move on to Brian? I mean, you're there. What's going on with that?
Well, the DOJ has indicted 2 Chinese Americans on this premise that in Chinatown here in New York City, that there was a secret Chinese police station being operated. In actual fact, what the so-called police station was a service center meant to serve Chinese Americans, Chinese nationals living in the United States, so they can get things like licenses and various other documents updated, because they can't go to China. They can't do that through their local government in China. So they do it here in the United States. It's a very standard and common institution that exists for many different migrant groups who may live in the United States. But that's really the whole story. It is a McCarthyist smear. They are being accused by the DOJ of harassing dissidents, and the dissidents that they are referring to is the Falun Gong, which is a right-wing cult very connected to the United States government. During the Bush Jr. administration, I like to bring this up, Falun Gong was actually able, when I believe Hu Jintao was the president then, there was a press conference on the White House lawn, and a Falun Gong protester was able to infiltrate the press corps and get into this event and interrupt it, denouncing China. And the Falun Gong has many very well-funded institutions like the Epoch Times. You may get strange advertisements from them on our YouTube channel when no one asked for it. And there's many other associated institutions. Shenyun, which is a huge dance company that likes to promote how great China was before, quote unquote, communism, basically when China was living in the Stone Age and people were dying at the age of 40. But that's the kind of message that they promote. They're religious fundamentalists, they're a cult group. And that's who the US government is protecting right now in this case, using them as a convenient excuse to go after Chinese Americans, which is what the United States has been doing ever since this amplified war on China has escalated in the United States. Abroad, also what you've seen is an intense attack on Chinese people, on Asian Americans in general, both from the state and also from the general population, which has been taken down a propaganda war that's only confused people and ratcheted up racial tensions.
I mean, good insights on that, Danny, and I appreciate that. The thing that I also want to point out is, we have the British councils all over the world. They aren't the British embassies. They are councils that support, as well as certain types of Canadian organizations that help support people around the world. You see it when you move to countries. Hey, why not sign up to the British Council if you're British and if you're in, China? I mean, we also heard that some of these organizations did cooperate with local law enforcement in case there was something that they needed to do. I mean, we could easily say and talk about, all the field offices around the world, with the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And let's not, we could dig even deeper into the NGO organizations that, I'm going to go to Brian Berletic on this one. You know very well where I'm going with this about NGO organizations and what they do to destabilize countries. Over to you, Brian.
But exactly. I mean, the U.S. funds a global network of sedition through organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy. I actually went through the Department of Justice's affidavit regarding the so-called secret police station. And they're talking about, just as Danny said, it as a service center, helping people fill out their documents. And then these people running it, they're part of a community association. And as part of the community association, or just independently, they were involved in other political activities. And then what the Western media did was mash that all together and make it out as if they had like prison cells and and then Americans hear this and they think Chinese police are just around the corner ready to arrest them or something. And they know that the public is going to misunderstand it. They do this very deliberately. And then again, Alex, as you were suggesting, at the same time, they're blowing this out of proportion and also just lying about it. They're actually funding sedition all around the world, sometimes violent sedition. And then we can talk. Maybe we could talk about that. I mean, look at what it did in, say, a place like Ukraine, or say a place like Syria, where they were backing armed groups, giving weapons to these people. So what the U.S., this is what they do. They do this around the world for real, and then they project what they're doing onto China to scare people. And I kind of want to go back to the opening, because I wrote a couple of the things that I heard in that opening segment.
Tell us.
One of the presenters said, "Our world is disintegrating." And he's acting as if the whole world, because I don't live in the United States. So when I hear that, I just think, what is he talking about? Because things are kind of okay over here. What does he mean by the world is disintegrating? U.S. hegemony, the world where the U.S. was in charge of everything, that's disintegrating. And then he amazingly said that the military budget is not big enough. And I mean, it's always the big, whenever you look at it, it's always the biggest that it's ever been. And it's always going up. That is not, I don't even know how they could say that. Like, how much bigger must it be? And then they always say communist China, especially on networks like Fox News, because they know it's usually been a psychological button.
It's been Maria Bartiromo, and I mean, she's been screaming for weeks now. And, as I told you, and I think everybody knows here, my father's always said, the guilty scream the loudest. I think that she is going to be one of the next Fox contributors. I don't even want to call her a journalist, that could be on her way out. That's speculation. Back to you. Sorry, Brian.
Sure. And, they're saying communist China, they're getting their military ready, and all about Taiwan. And this, this police station story is a microcosm of how misinformed the American people are in general. they honestly, a lot of people in America, I'm sure Danny is well aware of this. You ask the average American what they think about Taiwan, they honestly think it is a real country that is being bullied by China. They have no idea that on the U.S. State Department's official website right now, it says the U.S. upholds the one China policy, where there's one China and Taiwan is part of it, and there's only one government, it's the People's Republic of China in Beijing. They don't even know that. And then when you do know that, and then you see the U.S. pumping weapons into Taiwan, 400 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, for example, which won't get there until 2029, but they sold it to them anyway. That's a huge provocation. I mean, imagine if China was doing that with Canada right next door to the United States, or worse still, Catalina Island right off the coast of California. Imagine if they were pumping like hundreds of anti-ship missiles into Catalina Island.
Now, Brian, I want to interject with that comment is what you're saying that, imagine if that happened. Well, being part of Canada, Quebec, at one point did want to sever its ties with Canada. We did have a referendum on it, very close. But I can imagine at that time, if the Americans went in there on a visit, meeting, one of the province or one of the premiers of one of our provinces, and then started bringing in military hardware and said, hey, guys, don't worry. If you want to go your own way instead of staying part of Canada, we got your back. And now it's really starting to dig into my brain here on how close we actually were to potentially having some conflict even in Canada about this. Because if they're going to do it halfway around the world to nations, continually doing it, of course, as I said, U.S. is running out of nations to invade. This could definitely happen. Mistakes can happen. Today I was talking with a couple of friends here that visiting China, and I was saying, guys, the more I'm starting to go back in history here and start, hitting certain important dates, I'm starting to really question a lot of things. And I think that defining moment that happened to me was the breakup of Yugoslavia when that happened. And I went on an adventure for about 4 months, traveling through all the ex-Yugoslavian countries, and went on a fact-finding mission. And the stuff I found out that when I was on the road there, I tell you, it changed my whole perception on what I look at the world today. It's pretty daunting on what this military-industrial complex can do. Anyone want to pick up from this?
Yeah, well, I'd like to add on to the connection to the Chinese police station story, because I think everything you say, Alex and Brian, really do speak to this just a rabid war propaganda. And I remember, Brian, I had you on my program months ago, where I played a video about this same Chinese police station story just in the UK. And I remember us going through the organization behind it. And so the DOJ is actually basically piggybacking off of an organization called Safeguard Defenders. And while you cannot find who funds Safeguard Defenders, this shady organization used to be called the Chinese Urgent Action Working Group, which is funded by the European Endowment for Democracy and the National Endowment for Democracy in the United States, meaning that it is a cutout of European and U.S. intelligence. And so that's where a lot of this war propaganda comes from. And the fact that most people in the United States, if they hear the word Taiwan, think that Taiwan is a country, goes to show how effective it can be, regardless of whether the United States' mainstream media is trusted or not. It's because the U.S. political class and their media accomplices continuously repeat over and over again language and words and propaganda that indicate as much to people that we should be acknowledging Taiwan as a country, despite the fact that that is completely against international law, and it doesn't even conform to the own standards of the United States and their joint communiques with China. Just shows how effective this propaganda can be, and why we should legitimately be concerned when the U.S. foreign policy establishment, the neocon foreign policy establishment, makes moves to prepare for war with China over Taiwan. It's because they have been able to create a pretty fertile environment for these ideas to support such a war.
Danny, I've been watching your channel now for close to a year, you've really changed the dynamics of your channel. Can you tell me what's kind of shifted you more in? I mean, you dropped the, I believe it used to be called the Left Lens. Now it's Danny Haiphong. I mean, what's going on with you?
Well, what I've noticed is that, I mean, I consider myself someone on the left, but it's really hard to describe to ordinary people what that means anymore, because in the United States, the political environment is firmly on the side of the establishment, meaning that most people are just not able to generate the kind of political activity and will to challenge the political establishment. So, what is hegemonic, what is dominant, are the ideas of the dominant class. And that is right now the foreign policy blob controlled by these mega corporations, the military industrial complex, big finance, etc. And so it's really hard to describe to ordinary people what the left is over and over and over again. And my interest is primarily and foremost peace. It is self-determination. It is the principles within the UN Charter. It is multipolarity. It is this movement for greater sovereignty and self-determination on the world stage, because I do believe that any kind of progressive future comes from that for everybody, not just the countries leading it like China and Russia, that actually we all benefit from a more fair, just, and democratic world order. And that, I believe, is the principal way that real progressive change, real change that will benefit the majority of people everywhere, including in the big countries waging all of these wars, will be from that. And so that's what I focus on more so now. And so the name change was really just to clarify that, because when it comes to election seasons, when it comes to certain points in the US's political climate, the term left, the term right, they become so hyper politicized without a clear definition. And it usually is the establishment that drives such definitions. And because of the content focus of where I'm at now, because of how I focus on world affairs, it can get very confusing for people. And so my approach and my strategy has changed. It's time to talk to people, whoever they are, wherever they are, from where they are, and then move people in the direction that I think is necessary, which is supporting multipolarity, supporting the countries that are under fire from US warmongering, from collective West warmongering. And so that really explains the change of my channel and why I decided to rebrand, so to speak.
Well, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, because, I mean, in one sense, you're saying that the Americans and the aggressiveness of NATO, but yet your coverage is of Russia and Ukraine, which is it must have caused a little bit of I'm not going to say confusion, but definitely made your subscriber base quite interesting at one point, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a change, right? Because there was a time where I would focus way more on domestic political affairs in the United
Mhm.
States. But it just so happens that there is I would call this a very sleepy time in the United States, in the sense that there isn't a lot of activity going on in the US political stratosphere that speaks to anything that would be more than, let's say, just criticizing the two-party system over and over again. And so, in lieu of that, I know that there are many people who do that, and I respect all of them who do that. But I decided that that's just not something I can continue to be inspired by. And if I'm not inspired, I don't know how anyone who listens to me can be inspired. I think that there is something that's very dangerous in the United States, and that's nihilism. This is the idea that there is no hope for change. It is why Barack Obama was so successful in 2008, is because he was able to harp on this concept of hope and basically turn it into an abstraction, so that people would vote for him regardless of where he stood, and regardless of where we probably should have known where he stood back in 2004, when he said, we're all Americans, and yeah, that Iraq war thing, maybe not such a good idea, but I'm for smart wars, right? Like, he was saying that for years, and nobody could listen because they were so drugged on the hope and change rhetoric. So I think, for me, I would say my channel is not about hope and not about, oh, whether something good should happen or could happen. It's about what is happening in the world now that actually does inspire real change. And that change is happening now. And that's why I think it's so important to focus on China, to focus on Russia, to focus on all of the countries that have decided to align with them in some respect or another to build a better future. And what's so inspiring about that is that it is being built. It is being built. It's not something that lives in the abstraction of, oh, if you vote for a politician every 4 years, maybe you'll get something good. No, actually, China, Russia, Iran, these countries are coming together and really building better infrastructure, better lives for their people and the people of the world. And they have a principle and a philosophy that says that is really the goal moving forward from here.
I'm going to shift now to, and thank you for that, Danny.